Adam, the first man. Before the first river carved its silver path through the sleeping earth, before the cry of any living creature rose beneath the heavens, silence ruled the endless void with ancient authority. Darkness stretched beyond measure, heavy and infinite, swallowing every unseen horizon beneath layers of cold stillness untouched by time itself. No wind moved across the emptiness. No flame burned within the abyss. The vast deep waited beneath a curtain of shadow so complete that even imagination could not yet give it shape. Then, from beyond mortal understanding, the voice of God shattered eternity's silence. It moved not as thunder alone, but as power woven into existence itself, commanding light to rise where only darkness had reigned. Across the void, radiant brilliance erupted like the birth of countless suns, flooding the heavens with golden fire that rolled endlessly through the cosmic deep. Mountains emerged from dust beneath divine command. Oceans gathered into roaring boundaries. Rivers carved through untouched valleys while forests breathed beneath skies painted with burning dawns of crimson and amber. The stars awakened one by one across the night above the newborn world, vast and eternal, hanging like living lanterns over the wilderness below. Wind swept across untouched plains carrying the scent of rain and fertile soil. Waterfalls thundered into hidden lakes veiled beneath ancient mist. The earth trembled with life waiting to awaken. Yet within all creation, amid every towering cedar and endless horizon, there remained a sacred absence. The world was magnificent, but incomplete. Beneath the glowing light of the sixth dawn, the Creator looked upon the untouched earth with divine purpose still unfolding beyond the understanding of heaven itself. Morning light spilled across the eastern horizon of Eden, washing the untouched world in rivers of gold that shimmered through towering trees and endless gardens untouched by corruption. Dew clung to every blade of grass like scattered crystal beneath the rising sun, while distant waterfalls echoed through valleys hidden beneath drifting silver mist. Birds unknown to future generations glided through the warm air with songs so pure they seemed woven from heaven itself. The ground breathed with life beneath the gaze of God, fertile and rich, prepared for a creation unlike any that had come before. Then the Creator descended into the sacred stillness of the earth. Dust swirled softly across the garden floor as divine hands reached toward the soil beside the riverbanks of Eden. The wind slowed. Even the distant creatures of the wilderness fell silent beneath the weight of what heaven was preparing to witness. From the earth itself, God formed the body of a man. Clay and dust shaped beneath eternal power, molded with purpose into arms, hands, eyes, and the silent chest of one who did not yet breathe. The figure lay motionless beneath shafts of sunlight, piercing through ancient branches overhead. Then came the breath. God leaned close to the lifeless form, and the breath of life entered the man's body like sacred fire filling an empty temple. His chest rose sharply. Fingers trembled against the earth. Eyes opened beneath the first sunrise humanity would ever witness. Adam inhaled the scent of rain-soaked soil, flowering trees, and flowing water for the very first time. Above him stretched the endless heavens glowing with divine light. Around him the living world stirred in quiet wonder as creation welcomed its first man into existence. Adam rose slowly from the earth beside the rivers of Eden, his breathing unsteady as life surged through every part of his newly awakened body. Warm wind moved through the towering trees overhead, carrying the scent of cedar, blooming flowers, and distant rain drifting across the untouched wilderness. Sunlight spilled across his skin while golden reflections danced upon the flowing waters beside him. Before him stretched a world untouched by death, untouched by sorrow, untouched by fear. Vast gardens rolled toward distant hills wrapped in silver morning mist, while birds circled high above beneath endless blue heavens. Every sound seemed alive with divine harmony. Waterfalls thundered beyond the forest. Leaves whispered softly in the wind. Creatures moved peacefully through the grasslands without violence or terror. Adam walked carefully through Eden with wonder filling his eyes. His bare feet pressed against soft earth still cool beneath the fading dawn, while streams wound between flowering trees heavy with fruit untouched by decay. Lions rested beside lambs in the shade of ancient groves. Deer drank from crystal rivers without fear. Even the air itself carried peace deeper than mortal language could ever describe. Then the voice of God moved once more through the garden, calm and eternal, surrounding Adam like living light. The Creator spoke to the first man as a father speaks to his beloved son, revealing the beauty and abundance placed under his care. Adam listened beneath swaying branches while sunlight flickered across the rivers around him. Every word settled deep within his spirit with sacred clarity. He was not born from chaos. He was chosen, formed with purpose, entrusted with dominion over the living earth itself. As evening slowly approached, shadows lengthened across Eden's endless beauty, and the first man stood beneath the glowing heavens unaware that all humanity rested silently within his future. The days within Eden unfolded like living poetry beneath the hand of God, each sunrise awakening the garden in waves of golden light that rolled across rivers, forests, and endless flowering fields. Adam wandered through the sacred world entrusted to him, learning the rhythms of creation beneath skies untouched by storm or darkness. He moved beside towering waterfalls whose thunder echoed through hidden valleys veiled in drifting mist. He walked beneath trees so vast their branches formed cathedrals of emerald light overhead, while beams of sunlight broke through the leaves like streams of liquid fire. Every creature approached him without fear. Massive elephants crossed the plains beside him with slow and peaceful steps. Bright-winged birds landed upon his shoulders while wolves rested silently beneath the shade of ancient groves. Adam gave names to every living creature beneath heaven, speaking with a voice still untouched by grief or anger. Yet as countless days passed beneath the beauty of paradise, a quiet emptiness slowly stirred within him. At twilight he often stood beside the rivers alone, watching the crimson glow of sunset fade across the horizon while cold stars awakened above the earth one by one. The creatures of the garden moved together in pairs through the wilderness around him, yet Adam walked alone beneath the vastness of creation. The wind carried soft echoes through the trees while distant waters whispered against smooth stones along the riverbanks. Something within the first man longed for companionship deeper than words could describe. God saw the silence hidden inside Adam's heart long before the man himself fully understood it. Beneath the silver light of evening, as shadows deepened across Eden and fireflies drifted like living stars through the garden, the Creator prepared to reveal another wonder unlike anything the earth had yet witnessed. Night settled gently across Eden like a veil of sapphire and silver, covering the endless garden beneath countless stars burning across the heavens above. Cool wind moved softly through the trees while rivers reflected moonlight like flowing glass beneath the darkness. Adam rested beside the ancient groves after another day wandering through the beauty of creation, yet the quiet ache within his spirit remained. He had walked among every living creature beneath heaven. He had stood beside roaring waterfalls and beneath mountains crowned with morning fire. Still, No companion shared his thoughts, his wonder, or the sacred breath of life placed within him by God himself. Then the Creator caused a deep sleep to fall upon the first man. Silence spread across the garden as Adam's breathing slowed beneath the silver glow of the night sky. Leaves ceased their whispering. Even the creatures of Eden seemed to pause beneath the holy weight of what was unfolding. God knelt beside Adam beneath the trees and reached into the side of the sleeping man with divine purpose. From Adam's own flesh and bone, the Creator formed another human being. Slowly she emerged beneath heaven's light, her face illuminated by moonlit radiance reflecting through the garden streams nearby. The wind moved softly through her dark hair as she opened her eyes for the first time and looked upon the living world around her. She was unlike anything creation had yet revealed. Grace and strength existed together within her presence like music woven into flesh. When Adam awoke beneath the fading stars, dawn was beginning to glow beyond the eastern hills. He turned and saw her standing beside the rivers of Eden, bathed in golden sunrise. Wonder overwhelmed him completely. For the first time since life entered his body, Adam no longer stood alone beneath the heavens. Morning unfolded across Eden with radiant beauty as sunlight poured through the trees in glowing rivers of gold, warming the earth beside the flowing waters where Adam and Eve walked together beneath the gaze of God. The garden seemed to awaken differently now, alive with deeper harmony, as though creation itself rejoiced at the union of the first man and woman. Birds circled high above them through endless blue skies, while distant waterfalls thundered softly beyond the forests wrapped in silver mist. Eve moved through the garden with quiet wonder shining in her eyes, her fingers brushing against flowers untouched by decay and branches heavy with abundant fruit. Adam walked beside her with peace filling the emptiness that had once lingered inside him. Together they explored the endless beauty of Eden, crossing green valleys where herds moved peacefully through the grasslands and resting beneath ancient trees whose roots stretched deep into the fertile earth below. At twilight, they often stood beside the rivers watching the heavens blaze with crimson and amber light, while cool wind carried the scent of rain and cedar through the wilderness around them. The voice of God still moved through the garden in the evening hours, surrounding them with divine presence beyond mortal understanding. They listened together beneath the glowing skies as the Creator spoke of life, stewardship, and the sacred trust placed within their hands. Yet within the center of Eden stood one tree unlike all others. Its branches rose toward heaven with mysterious beauty, wrapped in silence deeper than the rest of the garden. God had commanded them never to eat from it, warning that death would enter the world through disobedience. Adam and Eve listened with innocent hearts untouched by suspicion or rebellion. But beyond the peaceful rivers and glowing forests of paradise, unseen darkness had already begun moving silently toward the garden. Far beyond the rivers of Eden, beyond the valleys glowing beneath untouched sunlight, darkness stirred with ancient hatred against the beauty God had created. Among the shadows moved the serpent, subtle and patient, carrying within him rebellion born before humanity ever breathed its first breath. He watched the garden from beneath twisted branches where cold wind whispered through the leaves like distant warnings lost beneath the peaceful sounds of paradise. Days passed as Adam and Eve continued walking beneath the heavens, unaware that evil now lingered within the sacred boundaries of Eden itself. Morning after morning, golden light spilled across the garden while mist drifted through the forests and birds sang from the high branches above. Yet the serpent waited silently beside the forbidden tree at the center of the garden. Its fruit shimmered beneath the sunlight with unnatural brilliance, glowing like polished jewels among the emerald leaves. One afternoon, as warm wind moved softly through the trees and distant thunder rolled faintly across the far horizon, Eve wandered near the forbidden place alone. The garden around her remained beautiful beyond imagination. Butterflies drifted above the flowers while streams whispered over smooth stones nearby. Yet beneath the peaceful silence, tension lingered unseen like a storm building beyond the mountains. Then the serpent spoke. His voice moved gently through the branches, smooth and calm, carrying deception wrapped in false wisdom. Eve paused beneath the tree, her eyes lifting toward its glowing fruit, while the serpent questioned the command of God with careful cruelty. Shadows shifted slowly across the ground as clouds drifted over the sun above them. Doubt, small and unfamiliar, entered the human heart for the very first time. The wind grew colder around the tree while silence spread through the garden, heavy with the terrible weight of choice waiting to unfold beneath heaven itself. Eve stood beneath the forbidden tree while the serpent's voice wound through the garden like unseen smoke, soft and poisonous beneath the fading afternoon light. The fruit hanging above her shimmered with unnatural beauty, its surface glowing beneath shafts of sunlight breaking through the branches overhead. Around her, Eden remained breathtakingly alive. Rivers flowed gently beyond the trees while distant birds called through the warm air. Yet the peace of paradise had begun to fracture beneath the quiet pressure of temptation. The serpent spoke again, twisting truth with subtle malice, promising wisdom beyond human understanding and power hidden from mortal sight. Eve looked toward the fruit as uncertainty stirred deeper within her spirit. She remembered the voice of God moving through the garden with loving authority. She remembered the warnings spoken beneath the evening skies. But now another voice challenged that truth, planting suspicion where innocence once lived untouched. Wind swept through the branches above her, scattering leaves across the earth while distant thunder rolled louder beyond the horizon. Slowly, Eve reached upward. Her fingers closed around the forbidden fruit as silence fell over Eden itself. For a single moment, creation seemed to hold its breath beneath the darkening heavens. Then she ate. The sound was small, almost invisible against the vastness of the garden, yet its consequence thundered across eternity. Shadows deepened beneath the trees as fear entered the human soul for the first time. Eve turned toward Adam, who stood watching beside her with confusion and dread clouding his face. The fruit passed into his hands beneath trembling light filtering through the branches above. He looked into her eyes, then toward the forbidden tree swaying against the growing wind. At last, Adam also ate. In that moment, innocence shattered like glass beneath divine judgment. The warmth of Eden faded around them. The air itself seemed colder. Far above the garden, dark clouds gathered across the heavens while humanity crossed forever into the sorrow of disobedience. The moment Adam swallowed the forbidden fruit, a terrible stillness spread through Eden like darkness consuming the final light of day. Wind tore suddenly through the garden, bending branches and scattering leaves across the riverside paths where peace had once reigned without end. The sky above dimmed beneath gathering clouds while distant thunder rolled across the horizon with growing fury. Adam and Eve stood frozen beneath the forbidden tree as fear entered their hearts for the very first time. Their innocence vanished beneath the crushing weight of shame awakening inside them. No longer did they see themselves with purity untouched by sin. They became aware of their nakedness, their vulnerability, their separation from the holiness that once surrounded them like living light. Desperation filled their breathing as they gathered leaves with trembling hands, weaving together fragile coverings beneath the cold shadows of the trees. The garden itself seemed changed around them. Rivers no longer sounded peaceful, but mournful. The cries of distant creatures echoed strangely through the wilderness, while the once gentle wind now carried unease through every branch and valley of Eden. Then, as evening approached, the voice of God moved once more through the garden. It was the same voice that had once filled them with peace beneath glowing sunsets and silver stars. Yet now terror seized them completely. Adam and Eve fled into the trees, hiding among the shadows while their breathing echoed sharply through the darkening forest. Footsteps moved through the garden with terrible authority as the Creator called out to the first man. The question pierced through the silence of Eden with heartbreaking sorrow. Adam emerged slowly from hiding, his eyes lowered beneath the fading light, while Eve stood beside him trembling beneath the storm-filled sky. The distance between humanity and God, once unimaginable, had now become painfully real beneath the ruined beauty of paradise. Rain began falling softly across Eden as Adam and Eve stood before the Creator beneath skies heavy with storm and grief. Thunder echoed through the distant hills while cold winds swept through the trees that had once sheltered them in perfect peace. The garden remained beautiful beyond mortal understanding, yet sorrow now moved through its rivers and forests like a shadow spreading across the earth itself. Adam could barely lift his eyes from the ground beneath him. Eve trembled beside him while droplets of rain clung to her face like silent tears. The voice of God carried through the storm with both justice and unbearable sadness, revealing the consequence of humanity's disobedience. The serpent would be cursed among all creatures. Pain and suffering would enter human life. The earth itself would resist mankind through hardship, sweat, and sorrow. Death, once unknown beneath the light of Eden, would now follow every generation born from Adam's blood. Each word fell upon the first man and woman with crushing weight as lightning flashed across the heavens above them. Yet even within judgment, mercy remained. God clothed Adam and Eve with garments fashioned by his own hands, covering their shame beneath the fading light of paradise. Then came the final sorrow. Beyond the rivers and flowering fields stood the eastern boundary of Eden, where the world outside waited cold and untamed beneath gathering darkness. Adam looked back toward the garden as tears filled his eyes. He saw the glowing trees, the peaceful streams, the golden light still resting upon the distant hills where he had once walked beside God without fear. Slowly, with grief heavier than words could contain, Adam and Eve stepped beyond the gates of Eden into a broken world. Behind them, blazing cherubim appeared with swords of living fire, guarding forever the path back to the tree of life. Beyond the gates of Eden, the world felt colder beneath the darkening heavens, stripped of the radiant peace that once surrounded Adam and Eve like living light. Harsh winds swept across barren plains carrying dust through the empty wilderness, while distant thunder echoed across mountains hidden beneath storm clouds. The ground beneath their feet was rough and unfamiliar, no longer softened by the sacred abundance of paradise. Adam walked in silence beside Eve, his shoulders heavy beneath grief too vast for words. Behind them, far beyond the hills, the fiery glow of Eden still pierced the night, where cherubim guarded the garden with blazing swords that turned like burning stars within the darkness. Each step away from that holy place deepened the sorrow inside them. Rain fell steadily through the night, soaking the earth while cold mist drifted between the rocks and twisted trees surrounding their path. Eve shivered beneath the garments God had given her, her eyes filled with fear at the wilderness now stretching endlessly before them. The cries of unseen creatures echoed through the valleys, no longer peaceful but sharp with hunger and survival. Adam lifted his gaze toward the heavens where clouds swallowed the stars one by one. He remembered the warmth of Eden's rivers, the golden sunsets beneath God's presence, the innocence now forever lost. Yet amid the crushing weight of exile, life still moved within them. Dawn eventually rose through the storm clouds, pale and distant beyond the eastern mountains. Adam knelt upon the hard soil beneath the gray sky and pressed his hands into the earth from which he had first been formed. For the first time, sweat gathered across his brow as he struggled against the resistant ground. Thorns tore against his skin. Dust clung to his hands. The curse upon creation had begun, and as the wind howled across the empty wilderness around them, humanity's long journey through suffering and redemption quietly entered its first sorrowful dawn. Seasons passed across the untamed earth while Adam and Eve struggled to build life beyond the lost beauty of Eden. The wilderness tested them beneath blazing summers and freezing nights as storms rolled across the plains with violent fury. Adam labored beneath the burning sun, breaking hardened ground with weary hands while sweat darkened the dust upon his skin. The earth resisted him now. Crops failed beneath sudden droughts. Thorns spread through the fields like scars upon the land. Every harvest demanded pain and endurance. Eve gathered water from distant rivers beneath skies, filled with circling birds and drifting storm clouds. At night they rested beside small fires whose trembling light barely pushed back the endless darkness surrounding them. Yet even within sorrow, love endured between them. They spoke quietly beneath the stars of Eden's rivers and glowing gardens, remembering the sound of God's voice moving through the evening wind. Sometimes Adam would fall silent while staring into the flames, haunted by the memory of paradise forever beyond reach. Then came the first cry of new life beneath the cold winds of the wilderness. Eve gave birth to a son as dawn spread pale light across the horizon. Adam held the child in trembling hands beside the fire while tears filled his eyes. The boy's breathing was soft and fragile, yet within him rested the future of humanity itself. They named him Cain. Later another son was born beneath the shelter of rough stone and cedar branches, a quieter child whose eyes carried gentleness beneath the harshness of the world around him. His name was Abel. The brothers grew beneath the shadow of exile, learning the labor and suffering now woven into human existence. Cain walked the fields beside his father, strong and determined beneath the blazing sun. Abel wandered among the flocks across the hills, listening to the wind move through the valleys beneath open skies. And though the family endured together beyond Eden's gates, darkness already lingered silently within the human heart, waiting for the moment it would rise again. Years unfolded beneath the changing skies as Cain and Abel grew into men upon the rugged earth east of Eden. Dawn after dawn, Adam watched his sons walk separate paths beneath the shadow of humanity's fallen nature. Cain labored among the fields with fierce determination, his hands hardened by endless toil beneath the scorching sun. Dust clung to his skin while sweat darkened his brow as he wrestled crops from stubborn ground cursed by sin. Abel moved differently through the world. He wandered among the sheep across rolling hills covered in tall grass, swaying beneath the wind. He listened to rivers flowing through the valleys and watched the stars emerge each night with quiet wonder resting inside his spirit. Though the brothers shared blood, something unseen divided them more deeply with every passing season. One evening, beneath skies painted crimson by the setting sun, both sons came before God with offerings from their labor. Cain brought the fruit of the earth gathered from the fields he had fought to cultivate. Abel brought the firstborn of his flock, offered with reverence and humility beneath heaven's gaze. Smoke rose into the darkening sky as cold wind swept across the stone altar standing beneath the hills. Then the silence changed. God looked with favor upon Abel's offering, but Cain's heart hardened when his own sacrifice was not accepted. Jealousy spread through him like fire consuming dry wilderness grass beneath a storm wind. His eyes darkened with bitterness while shadows deepened across the earth around them. God spoke to Cain with warning and mercy, urging him to master the sin rising within his soul before it ruled over him completely. Yet Cain listened only to the rage growing inside him. Days later, he led Abel into an open field beneath gray skies heavy with distant thunder. The wind moved through the tall grass while silence stretched across the empty land. Then, beneath the heavens that had once witnessed humanity's creation, Cain lifted his hand against his own brother, and the first blood of mankind stained the earth beneath the curse of sin. Abel's body lay motionless upon the field as cold wind swept across the tall grass, stained dark beneath his blood. The heavens above seemed silent beneath gathering clouds, while distant thunder rolled through the hills, like mourning echoing across the earth itself. Cain stood trembling beside his fallen brother, his breathing sharp and uneven beneath the weight of what he had done. The rage that had consumed him vanished, leaving only terror and emptiness within his soul. Around him the wilderness remained vast and indifferent. Birds circled high above the gray sky, while the wind whispered through the grass in restless waves. Then the voice of God came once more, moving across the field with sorrowful authority. The Creator called to Cain, asking where Abel had gone. Fear tightened within the first murderer as he answered with cold defiance, attempting to hide his guilt beneath bitterness and pride. But nothing could remain hidden beneath the gaze of God. The blood of Abel cried out from the ground itself, and judgment fell upon Cain beneath the storm-dark heavens. The earth he once cultivated would no longer yield its strength to him. He would become a wanderer upon the earth, restless and marked by the consequence of his violence. Cain staggered backward beneath the weight of the curse, while rain began falling softly across the field where Abel lay. Yet even now, mercy remained intertwined with judgment. God placed a mark upon Cain so no man would destroy him, preserving the broken line of humanity despite its corruption. Far away, Adam and Eve mourned beside the body of their son beneath the cold light of dawn. Eve wept with grief beyond language while Adam stared silently toward the horizon, understanding at last how deeply sin had poisoned the world beyond Eden. The first family of mankind now carried within them the unbearable knowledge of death, violence, and sorrow. And as Abel was laid into the earth from which humanity had first been formed, the long tragedy of human history continued beneath the shadow of the fallen world. Time moved relentlessly across the generations born from Adam's blood, carrying humanity farther from the purity once known within Eden's gates. Settlements rose beside rivers and valleys where smoke curled into the sky from fires burning through the night. Children laughed beneath the fading light of evening, while shepherds guided flocks across windswept hills and farmers struggled against stubborn earth beneath the blazing sun. Yet alongside human growth came deeper corruption spreading silently through the hearts of men. Violence became common beneath the heavens. Pride rose like towers built against God himself. The memory of Eden faded into distant legend whispered beside campfires beneath cold stars. Adam watched the world changing around him with sorrow heavy upon his spirit. His hair turned silver beneath passing years while the strength of youth slowly left his body. Still he remembered every detail of paradise with painful clarity. He remembered the rivers glowing beneath golden dawns. He remembered the voice of God moving through the garden in the cool of evening. Often he sat beside the fire at night, while younger generations gathered around him in silence, listening as he spoke of the world before sin entered creation. His voice carried both wonder and grief beneath the dark skies overhead. He warned them of disobedience, of pride, of the destruction hidden inside rebellion against the Creator. Some listened with reverence. Others turned away toward their own desires. Beyond the settlements, storms rolled endlessly across the earth while kingdoms of men slowly expanded beneath ambition and conflict. Yet even amid the growing darkness, hope had not vanished completely. God continued preserving a faithful line through Adam's descendants, carrying forward the promise that one day evil itself would be crushed beneath divine redemption. Adam clung to that promise during the final years of his long life. And as the first man gazed toward the distant horizon where dawn slowly broke across the fallen earth, he understood that humanity's story had only just begun beneath the watchful eyes of heaven. But when he opened them again, only the fallen world remained around him. Humanity had multiplied greatly across the earth, yet corruption spread through the generations like poison within the blood of mankind. Violence darkened cities rising beside the rivers. Men sought power over mercy, pride over obedience, conquest over peace. Adam watched this growing darkness with unbearable sorrow, knowing the wound of sin began through his own disobedience. Yet beneath his grief, faith still endured. He spoke often to his descendants about the Creator who formed humanity from dust and breathed life into mortal flesh. He reminded them that even beyond judgment, God had shown mercy. And as Adam's final days approached beneath the fading light of countless seasons, the first man waited quietly for the moment he would return to the earth from which he had first been formed. On the final evening of Adam's life, the sky burned with deep crimson light as the sun slowly disappeared behind distant mountains wrapped in drifting mist. Cool winds swept across the wilderness, carrying the scent of rain and cedar through the aging settlements of mankind. Families gathered near their fires beneath the darkening heavens while shadows stretched across the earth like silent reminders of passing time. Inside a simple shelter built from stone and weathered wood, Adam rested upon woven skins beside a trembling flame. His breathing had grown shallow with age, slow and uneven beneath the weight of centuries. Around him stood generations born from his blood, children and grandchildren whose numbers had become too great to count. Silence filled the shelter except for the crackling fire and the distant sound of wind moving across the plains outside. Eve remained beside him, her face lined with grief and endurance earned through a lifetime of exile beyond Eden. Adam lifted his fading eyes toward the heavens visible through the shelter opening above him. The stars had begun to appear. The same stars he first witnessed on the night life entered his body beneath the hand of God. Tears gathered slowly within his eyes as memory flooded through him one final time. He remembered awakening beside Eden's rivers beneath golden morning light. He remembered walking with God through forests untouched by death. He remembered the terrible sorrow of disobedience and the moment paradise vanished behind walls of living fire. Yet even now, as death approached for the first time in human history, Adam did not face the darkness without hope. He believed the Creator had not abandoned mankind forever. Somewhere beyond the suffering of the fallen world, redemption still waited within the promise of God. The fire beside him flickered softly while the wind howled through the wilderness outside. Then, beneath the endless heavens, Adam exhaled his final breath and returned to the dust from which humanity itself had first been born. After Adam's death, sorrow settled heavily upon the generations of mankind like cold fog drifting across an endless valley before dawn. The first man, whose eyes had once witnessed Eden itself, was gone from the earth. Beneath gray skies and mournful wind, his descendants carried his body to a quiet hillside overlooking rivers and distant plains touched by the fading light of evening. The earth was soft from recent rain as stones were placed carefully around the resting place of humanity's first father. Silence spread among those gathered there. Some lowered their heads in grief, while others stared toward the darkening horizon, haunted by the reality of death now woven forever into human existence. Eve remained motionless beside the grave long after the others departed, listening to the wind whisper through the grass as memories flooded her weary heart. She remembered Adam standing beneath Eden's glowing trees in the innocence of creation. She remembered his laughter beside the rivers and the warmth of his hand beneath countless stars before sorrow entered the world. Now only silence answered her beneath the heavens. Yet life continued across the earth despite humanity's grief. Cities slowly expanded beside great rivers, while families multiplied across distant lands beyond the mountains. Shepherds guided flocks through cold valleys. Blacksmiths shaped tools beside roaring fires beneath smoke-filled skies. Hunters crossed dense forests wrapped in ancient mist where wild creatures moved unseen beneath towering trees. But as mankind increased, so too did wickedness. Violence spread through the earth like a growing storm. Men turned their hearts toward greed, lust, and cruelty while the memory of God faded beneath the noise of human ambition. Blood stained the ground through endless conflict between tribes and kingdoms rising against one another. And from the heights of heaven, the Creator looked upon the earth with sorrow deeper than mortal understanding, seeing humanity drifting further into darkness with every passing generation beneath the shadow of the curse. Generations passed like drifting sand carried across the deserts by relentless wind, and the corruption of mankind deepened beneath the heavens. Cities rose with towering walls of stone beside mighty rivers, while fires burned endlessly through the night beneath skies darkened by smoke and violence. Men forged weapons from iron and bronze, sharpening blades meant not for survival alone, but for conquest and bloodshed. Pride ruled the hearts of kings. Greed consumed merchants. Cruelty spread through villages where the weak were crushed beneath the power of the strong. The earth groaned beneath the weight of human wickedness. Rivers once clear became stained with the memory of violence, while distant cries echoed across battlefields beneath storm-filled skies. Yet among the growing darkness, a few still remembered the Creator. Small families gathered beneath the stars to pray beside flickering firelight, teaching their children the ancient stories of Adam, Eden, and the God who formed humanity from dust. One man among them walked differently from the rest. His name was Enoch. Beneath the changing seasons of the earth, Enoch remained faithful to God, while corruption consumed the generations around him. He wandered through the wilderness beneath glowing dawns and storm-filled nights with quiet reverence living inside his spirit. The wind carried through his robes as he climbed rocky hills to pray beneath endless skies crowded with stars. Unlike the violent men of his age, Enoch sought wisdom instead of power, humility instead of pride. People whispered about him beside their fires at night, saying he walked with God as Adam once had within Eden itself. And though the world around him descended deeper into chaos, peace rested upon Enoch like light breaking through heavy clouds after endless rain. Then one evening, beneath crimson skies fading into twilight, Enoch disappeared from the earth. No grave marked his passing. No body remained beneath the dust, for God had taken him, preserving a living testimony that even in humanity's darkest generations, faithfulness still mattered beneath the eyes of heaven. The centuries moved forward beneath the relentless march of time, carrying humanity toward a darkness unlike anything the earth had yet witnessed. Wickedness spread across every land beneath heaven. Violence ruled cities and wilderness alike, while men abandoned mercy for power and pleasure. The cries of the innocent rose from the earth like smoke drifting toward the heavens. Kings built monuments to themselves beneath blazing suns, while armies marched across valleys soaked with blood beneath storm-filled skies. Even the beauty of creation seemed burdened beneath mankind's corruption. Forests burned through endless wars. Rivers carried the ashes of ruined settlements. Cold winds swept through abandoned villages where silence now lingered among broken stone and shattered wood. From heaven, God looked upon the fallen world with grief beyond human understanding. Every intention of mankind's heart had become consumed by evil. Yet amid the spreading darkness, one man remained righteous before the Creator. His name was Noah. Far from the violence of corrupt cities, Noah lived with humility beside his family upon the rugged earth. He worked beneath scorching suns and cold rains while teaching his children to honor the God forgotten by most of humanity. Noah often walked alone through the wilderness at dusk, listening to the wind move across the hills while distant thunder rolled beyond the horizon. Unlike the generations surrounding him, he still feared the Creator with reverence and obedience. Then one evening beneath gathering storm clouds, the voice of God came to Noah with terrible warning. Judgment was approaching the earth. The corruption of mankind had become unbearable beneath heaven itself. A flood unlike anything creation had ever known would cleanse the world of violence and rebellion. Noah listened in stunned silence as rain began falling softly across the darkening plains. Lightning flashed across the heavens while the wind rose through the trees around him. And beneath the shadow of the coming storm, humanity unknowingly stood at the edge of destruction, awaiting the day the skies themselves would break open in judgment upon the earth. Noah stood beneath the storm-dark heavens while rain drifted across the wilderness in cold silver sheets, the voice of God still echoing within his spirit like distant thunder rolling through endless valleys. Around him the earth continued in ignorance beneath the shadow of coming judgment. Fires burned within crowded cities where men feasted, traded, fought, and celebrated beneath skies they no longer feared. Music echoed through stone streets while merchants shouted beside marketplaces overflowing with wealth gathered through greed and violence. Yet hidden beneath the noise of human ambition, destruction approached with silent certainty. God commanded Noah to build a great ark upon the dry land, vast enough to preserve life through the flood that would soon consume the world. The task seemed impossible beyond mortal understanding. Still, Noah obeyed without hesitation. Day after day beneath blazing sun and bitter rain, he labored beside his sons, shaping massive beams of wood beneath the open heavens. The sound of hammers echoed across the plains while sawdust drifted through the wind around the growing structure. People traveled from distant settlements simply to stare at the enormous vessel rising where no sea existed nearby. Many laughed openly at Noah, mocking his warnings about divine judgment. Others cursed him beneath cruel laughter, believing the old man had surrendered his mind to madness. But Noah continued working in silence, his weathered hands bleeding against rough timber, while storm clouds often gathered above the horizon like dark omens ignored by mankind. At night he rested beside small fires beneath the stars while cold winds swept through the unfinished ark around him. His children slept nearby while Noah stared toward the heavens, listening to distant thunder echo across the earth. Fear lingered within him, Yet faith remained stronger. He trusted the Creator who had formed humanity from dust long before kingdoms ever rose upon the earth. And as years passed beneath the shadow of the coming flood, the ark stood taller against the horizon, a silent monument of obedience rising amid a world rushing blindly toward destruction. The ark towered above the plains like a mountain of dark wood beneath skies growing heavier with every passing season. Massive beams creaked beneath the wind while ropes snapped sharply through the air as Noah and his sons continued their labor from dawn until deep into the night. Sweat soaked their garments beneath the scorching sun, while cold rain often drenched the unfinished structure during violent storms rolling across the wilderness. Around them the world carried on in rebellion. Cities expanded beside rivers crowded with merchants and warriors. Music and drunken laughter echoed through the night, while violence consumed the streets beneath torchlight and smoke. Men mocked Noah openly, pointing toward the great ark with ridicule and contempt. Children threw stones against its wooden walls while crowds gathered to laugh at the old man preaching about judgment no one believed would come. Yet Noah's voice never wavered. Standing beside the towering vessel beneath darkening skies, he warned generation after generation that humanity's wickedness had reached heaven itself. Some listened with uneasy silence, but most turned away toward their pleasures and pride. Then the signs began. Strange winds swept across the earth, carrying unnatural cold even beneath the heat of summer. Animals moved differently through the wilderness. Birds abandoned certain valleys without reason, while herds crossed great distances as though guided by unseen command. The sky itself often darkened at midday beneath swirling clouds filled with distant lightning. Fear quietly spread among the people, though few would admit it aloud. One evening, as crimson sunset burned across the horizon like fire spilling through the heavens, Noah stood beside the completed ark with tears gathering in his eyes. The vessel was finished at last, vast and immovable against the empty plains. Thunder rolled across the distant mountains while the wind howled through the valleys around him. Then the voice of God came again, commanding Noah to gather his family and prepare for the final days before judgment would fall upon the earth. And beneath the growing darkness of the heavens, creation itself seemed to wait in trembling silence for what was about to begin. Morning arrived beneath skies thick with heavy clouds rolling endlessly across the heavens like dark waves swallowing the light of dawn. Cold wind swept across the plains around the ark while distant thunder echoed through the valleys with growing intensity. Then something extraordinary began to unfold across the earth. From forests hidden beyond the hills and deserts stretching toward distant mountains, animals started moving toward the ark in silent procession beneath the storm-dark sky. Pairs of creatures emerged from every direction as though guided by an invisible hand beyond human understanding. Massive elephants crossed the plains with slow, thunderous steps, while lions moved silently beside them without violence. Birds circled overhead in great spirals against the darkening heavens. Wolves, deer, horses, and countless living creatures approached the ark together beneath the rising wind. The people of the surrounding lands watched in stunned silence as the earth itself seemed to obey the command of the Creator. Fear spread through the crowds gathering near the ark's enormous walls. Some shouted curses toward Noah, while others stood frozen beneath the growing storm clouds, unable to explain the impossible sight unfolding before them. Noah guided the animals carefully into the ark while rain began falling lightly across the dust-covered ground. His wife and sons carried supplies through the massive entrance as lightning flashed across the sky above. The scent of wet earth filled the air while thunder shook the distant hills. Children cried among the crowds outside, while merchants abandoned their wagons and stared upward toward the unnatural heavens. Then came the final evening before judgment. Noah stood at the great entrance of the ark beneath cold rain and looked one last time upon the world beyond. Fires still burned in distant cities beneath the darkness. Human voices echoed faintly across the plains where life continued as though tomorrow would arrive unchanged. But Noah knew the hour had come. Slowly, beneath the roaring wind and flashing skies, he led his family inside the ark. Then God himself sealed the door behind them, and silence settled over the earth before the storm. For a brief moment after the ark was sealed, an eerie stillness settled across the earth beneath the blackened heavens. Wind ceased moving through the trees. Birds vanished from the sky. Even the distant voices of the crowds gathered outside faded into uneasy silence beneath the oppressive weight of the storm clouds hanging above creation. Inside the ark, Noah and his family stood motionless among the animals while lantern flames flickered against the wooden walls. The scent of damp timber and rain filled the dark interior as thunder rumbled across the mountains with terrifying force. Then the heavens broke open. Rain crashed upon the earth with violence beyond imagination, striking the ark like endless waves of stone. Lightning tore across the sky while thunder shook the foundations of the world itself. The people outside screamed as torrents of water flooded the plains within moments. Rivers burst from their banks. Streets disappeared beneath raging currents. The ground split open as fountains of the deep erupted upward from beneath the earth, unleashing catastrophic floods across every valley and city beneath heaven. Noah gripped the wooden beams of the ark while it groaned beneath the rising waters. Outside, humanity fought desperately against the judgment they had mocked for generations. Families fled toward hills already vanishing beneath the flood. Warriors dropped their weapons in terror, while merchants and kings alike cried out beneath the roaring storm. The ark lifted slowly from the ground as waves swallowed forests, homes, and entire cities beneath endless rain. Darkness consumed the horizon. Only lightning revealed glimpses of chaos beyond the ark's walls. Mountains disappearing into swirling floodwaters, shattered trees spinning through violent currents, desperate figures reaching upward before vanishing beneath the abyss. Day after day the rain continued without mercy. The world Adam once knew disappeared beneath an endless ocean stretching toward every horizon. And high above the waters, carried through the fury of divine judgment, the ark drifted alone beneath skies filled with thunder and sorrow. 40 days and 40 nights the storm raged across the earth without pause, drowning the world beneath waters deeper than any living generation had ever imagined. Inside the ark, darkness lingered beneath flickering lantern light, while rain hammered endlessly against the massive wooden walls. The cries of animals echoed through the chambers alongside the groaning of timber strained by violent waves crashing against the vessel. Noah barely slept during those endless days adrift upon the abyss. Often he stood alone beside the narrow openings near the upper deck, staring into the blackness outside, where lightning revealed only raging waters stretching endlessly beneath storm-filled skies. There were no mountains visible anymore, no forests, no cities burning in the distance. Everything the generations of mankind had built since Adam's exile now rested beneath the flood. The earth itself seemed erased beneath divine judgment. Fear weighed heavily upon Noah's family as the ark rose and fell through monstrous waves driven by roaring winds. Children clung to their mothers while thunder shook the vessel throughout the endless nights. Yet amid the terror, Noah continued praying beneath the darkness, trusting the God who had commanded him to build the ark long before the first drop of rain had fallen. Then, after many weeks beneath the storm, something began to change. One morning the thunder sounded farther away. The violence of the waves slowly weakened. Rain no longer struck the ark with the same relentless fury. Day by day, the clouds above the earth began to thin, while pale sunlight finally pierced through the darkness for the first time since judgment began. Cool winds swept gently across the endless waters as silence gradually replaced the chaos of the storm. Noah stepped carefully onto the upper deck and lifted his eyes toward the heavens glowing faintly beyond the fading clouds. Tears filled his face beneath the returning light. Though the world had perished beneath the flood, life still remained within the ark. And somewhere beneath the endless sea surrounding them, the earth waited quietly for rebirth beneath the mercy of God. Weeks passed as the ark drifted silently across the endless waters beneath pale skies washed clean by the storm. The violence of the flood had faded into an eerie calm, broken only by the creaking of timber and the distant cries of seabirds circling above the vast ocean below. Inside the ark, Noah and his family moved carefully among the animals while lanterns flickered softly against the wooden walls during the long nights. The scent of wet earth and rain still lingered within the air, yet hope slowly awakened where fear had once ruled. One morning, as cold mist drifted across the waters beneath a silver dawn, the ark shuddered beneath a sudden impact. Massive beams groaned as the vessel settled against solid ground hidden beneath the floodwaters. Noah climbed toward the upper deck, while wine swept through his gray beard and robes beneath the brightening heavens. Before him rose the distant peaks of mountains piercing through the sea like dark islands emerging from the deep. The ark had come to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. Tears filled Noah's eyes as sunlight broke through the clouds and reflected across the endless waters surrounding the vessel. Yet the earth remained drowned beneath the flood, and Noah waited patiently for the waters to recede. Days turned into weeks while mountains slowly emerged farther across the horizon beneath skies growing warmer with the approach of spring. Then Noah released a raven into the open air. The bird vanished into the distance above the waters, flying back and forth across the empty world. Later Noah released a dove, but it returned to the ark unable to find rest upon the earth. 7 days passed before he released the dove once more. At sunset the bird returned carrying a freshly plucked olive leaf within its beak. Hope spread through the ark like light breaking through darkness. The waters were retreating at last, and beneath the quiet glow of evening settling across the reborn world, Noah understood humanity stood at the threshold of a new beginning beneath heaven itself. At last the day arrived when God commanded Noah and his family to leave the ark and step once more upon the earth beneath open skies. Morning sunlight poured across the mountains of Ararat, while cool wind carried the scent of fresh soil and distant rain through the valleys below. Noah stood at the massive doorway of the ark as it slowly opened beneath beams of golden light piercing the darkness inside. Before him stretched a world transformed by judgment. Vast plains glistened beneath retreating waters while newly revealed forests shimmered with dew beneath the dawn. Rivers carved fresh paths through the valleys, and snow crowned the distant mountains beneath brilliant blue heavens untouched by storm. One by one the animals emerged from the ark into the reborn wilderness. Birds soared upward into the sunlight while herds crossed the wet grasslands with cautious steps. The sound of life returning to the earth echoed across the valleys beneath the brightening sky. Noah knelt upon the ground as tears fell from his face onto the soil still damp from the flood. The earth beneath his hands felt alive again, cleansed yet forever marked by the memory of divine judgment. His family gathered beside him in silence, while warm wind moved through the mountains around them. Then Noah built an altar from stone upon the hillside overlooking the valleys below. Smoke rose into the heavens as he offered sacrifice to God with gratitude and reverence. The scent of burning offerings drifted upward through the cool morning air while sunlight glowed across the reborn earth. Then the voice of God came once more, not with wrath, but with covenant and mercy. The Creator promised never again to destroy all living things through floodwaters, though humanity still carried the wound of sin within its heart. As Noah lifted his eyes toward the heavens, a radiant rainbow stretched across the clouds above the mountains, blazing with colors of fire and light against the fading remnants of the storm. It stood as an eternal sign that even after judgment, mercy still endured beneath the hand of God. The generations after the flood spread across the earth beneath the covenant of the rainbow, rebuilding life upon lands washed clean by judgment. Families journeyed through valleys rich with fertile soil, while rivers once again nourished growing settlements beneath the warmth of the sun. Children played beside newly planted fields, and shepherds guided flocks across green hills where silence had once followed the floodwaters. Yet though the earth had been renewed, the human heart remained unchanged. Pride slowly returned to mankind like embers reigniting beneath cold ashes. Tribes became nations, and nations sought greatness through power rather than obedience to God. Among the descendants of Noah arose mighty rulers whose names spread across the earth through conquest and ambition. One generation journeyed eastward across broad plains until they settled upon the land of Shinar beneath endless skies burned gold by the desert sun. There they spoke with one voice and shared one purpose. Rather than scattering across the earth as God had commanded, they desired to build a city that would make their name immortal among future generations. At the center of the city, they began constructing a great tower rising toward the heavens themselves. Day after day, the sound of labor echoed across the plains while workers shaped bricks beneath scorching heat, and smoke from endless fires drifted into the sky. The tower climbed higher with every passing season, casting its shadow across the growing city beneath it. Men gazed upward with pride swelling inside their hearts, believing human strength alone could reach the heavens. Yet from above, God looked upon their rebellion with sorrow and judgment once more. One morning confusion erupted among the workers beside the unfinished tower. Voices that once spoke together in unity suddenly became divided into countless languages no man could understand. Orders turned into chaos. Anger spread through the crowds while families and tribes separated beneath the blazing sun, unable to communicate with one another. The great tower stood unfinished against the sky as mankind scattered across the earth once again, carrying new tongues into distant lands beneath the watchful eyes of heaven. Centuries passed after the scattering at Babel, and humanity spread across deserts, mountains, forests, and distant coastlines beneath the endless heavens. Kingdoms rose beside mighty rivers while caravans crossed burning sands beneath the relentless desert sun. Great cities of stone and bronze flourished through trade, conquest, and power, their walls illuminated at night by countless fires flickering beneath smoke-filled skies. Yet among the nations, the knowledge of the true God faded once more beneath idols carved from wood and stone. Men bowed before false gods beneath towering temples while priests offered sacrifices upon altars stained with blood and fear. Still, hidden within the vastness of the earth, God preserved a single bloodline through which his promise would continue. In the ancient city of Ur, beside the flowing Euphrates River, lived a man named Abram. He was not a king or warrior, but a shepherd and wanderer whose heart remained open to the voice of the Creator. Abram spent long evenings beneath the stars outside his tent while cool desert wind swept across the silent plains. He often gazed upward at the heavens, sensing within his spirit that the gods worshipped by men were empty and powerless beside the eternal Creator who formed the earth itself. Then one night beneath skies overflowing with stars brighter than scattered fire across black velvet darkness, God called Abram by name. The voice came with authority deeper than thunder, commanding him to leave his homeland and journey toward a land yet unseen. Abram listened in silence while the desert wind moved softly around him and distant fires flickered across the sleeping camps nearby. God promised that through Abram's descendants, a great nation would rise and all peoples of the earth would one day be blessed. Though uncertainty waited beyond the horizon, Abram obeyed. At dawn he gathered his family, his flocks, and all he possessed beneath the growing light of morning. Then, with faith stronger than fear, Abram departed into the wilderness, beginning a journey that would shape the destiny of generations yet unborn beneath heaven itself. Abram's journey carried him across vast deserts and rugged mountains beneath skies that changed from blazing gold to cold starlit darkness with every passing day. His caravans moved slowly through barren valleys where wind swept dust across ancient paths traveled by wandering tribes and merchants. At night his family rested beside flickering fires while sheep and camels gathered near the tents beneath the endless heavens. Abram often stood awake long after the others slept, staring toward the stars while listening to the silence of the wilderness around him. Though he did not yet fully understand the purpose unfolding before him, he trusted the voice that had called him away from everything familiar. Seasons passed as Abram wandered through foreign lands beneath the guidance of God. He crossed fertile plains rich with vineyards and olive groves, then traveled through harsh wilderness where dry wind howled between jagged cliffs beneath burning skies. Many nights fear lingered within him. He had no kingdom, no armies, and no certainty beyond the promise spoken by the Creator. Yet every dawn he continued forward. One evening, after a long journey beneath the heat of the desert sun, Abram climbed a lonely hillside overlooking the land stretching endlessly before him. Twilight covered the earth in deep crimson, while distant rivers reflected the fading light like molten silver beneath the horizon. Then God spoke again. The Creator commanded Abram to look toward the heavens and count the stars if he was able. Abram lifted his eyes upward as countless lights blazed across the night beyond measure. The wind moved softly through the grass while silence surrounded the lonely hillside. God declared that Abram's descendants would become as numerous as those stars filling the heavens above him. Tears gathered in Abram's eyes beneath the sacred weight of the promise. Though he remained childless and wandering through a foreign land, faith awakened deeply within his spirit. And beneath the endless night sky stretching across creation, the covenant of God moved forward through one faithful man chosen to carry hope into the future of humanity. Years continued to pass across the deserts and valleys of Canaan, while Abram wandered beneath the promise of God, though no child had yet been born to carry the covenant forward. His hair grew silver beneath the scorching sun, and the strength of youth slowly faded from his body like water disappearing into dry earth. Many nights he sat beside the fire outside his tent listening to the wind sweep across the wilderness while doubt pressed heavily upon his aging heart. Around him servants slept beneath woven shelters while distant sheep moved quietly through the darkness under the watch of shepherds carrying flickering torches. Sarai, Abram's wife, shared his sorrow in silence. She had walked beside him through every barren valley and endless journey, yet her womb remained empty beneath the passing years. The promise of descendants more numerous than the stars now seemed impossible against the reality of age and human weakness. Still, God had not forgotten. One evening beneath skies glowing with the final light of sunset, the Creator appeared once more to Abram beside the ancient oaks of Mamre. Warm wind moved through the trees while shadows stretched across the earth beneath the deepening twilight. God spoke with divine authority, declaring that Abram would no longer bear the same name. He would now be called Abraham, father of many nations. Sarai would become Sarah, and through her a son would be born despite the impossibility standing before them. Abraham fell upon his face in awe and trembling disbelief while the heavens darkened above him. Yet the voice of God remained unwavering like mountains standing against the storm. The covenant would endure through generations still unborn. Long after kingdoms rose and fell upon the earth, Abraham's descendants would carry the promise of redemption forward beneath heaven itself. That night, Abraham stood outside his tent beneath countless stars blazing across the silent desert sky. Cool winds swept through the wilderness, while distant fires flickered across the hills. And though the future remained unseen beyond the darkness, faith burned stronger within him than ever before beneath the eternal gaze of God. When the appointed season arrived, laughter returned to Abraham's camp beneath the bright skies of Canaan. Sarah, once burdened by decades of sorrow and barrenness, gave birth to a son in her old age exactly as God had promised. The cries of the newborn echoed through the tents while servants rushed with joy beneath the warm light of dawn spreading across the hills. Abraham held the child carefully within trembling hands weathered by a lifetime of wandering. Tears filled his eyes as he looked upon the impossible miracle resting against his chest. The boy was named Isaac, meaning laughter, for both Abraham and Sarah had once struggled to believe such joy could still enter their lives after so many barren years. Outside the camp, the wilderness glowed beneath morning sunlight, while birds circled high above the valleys washed clean by recent rain. Shepherds guided flocks across the hills, while smoke rose from fires preparing meals within the tents. Yet amid the celebration, Abraham understood this child carried more than the happiness of a family. Isaac embodied the covenant itself, the living promise through which generations would one day emerge beneath the hand of God. The boy grew beneath the open skies of the desert, running among the tents and rocky hills while Abraham watched him with fierce love and quiet reverence. At night, father and son often walked together beneath the stars while cool wine drifted through the campfires surrounding them. Abraham spoke softly to Isaac about the Creator who formed the heavens and guided their wandering journey across the earth. The child listened with wide eyes beneath the endless night sky glowing above the wilderness. Yet far beyond Abraham's understanding, a moment of terrible testing waited silently within the future. The God who had given the child of promise would soon ask Abraham for a sacrifice beyond anything the human heart could bear. And beneath the peaceful beauty of the desert evenings, destiny moved quietly toward the mountain where faith itself would be tested beneath heaven's gaze. One cold morning before sunrise, while mist still drifted across the valleys of Canaan and silence covered the wilderness beneath fading stars, the voice of God came to Abraham with a command that pierced his soul like a blade. The Creator called him to journey to the land of Moriah and offer Isaac as a sacrifice upon a mountain yet to be revealed. For a long moment, Abraham stood motionless outside his tent, while wind moved softly through the darkness around him. The words seemed impossible beyond comprehension. Isaac was the child of promise, the son born through miracle and covenant after decades of waiting. Yet the voice of God remained clear beneath the stillness of dawn. Abraham said nothing to Sarah. Quietly he prepared wood for the offering, while servants saddled the donkeys beside flickering lantern light. Isaac walked beside his father with trust untouched by fear as the small group departed into the wilderness beneath a gray morning sky. Day after day they traveled across rocky hills and silent valleys where cold winds swept dust along the narrow paths before them. Abraham spoke little during the journey. His face remained heavy with sorrow while his heart wrestled between unbearable grief and unwavering obedience. At night he stared into the campfire flames long after the others slept, listening to distant wolves cry across the darkened hills beneath countless stars. Then on the third day, Abraham saw the mountain rising beyond the horizon beneath pale sunlight breaking through the clouds. The servants remained behind while father and son climbed the mountain alone, carrying the wood for the sacrifice. Isaac walked quietly beside Abraham beneath the cold wind sweeping across the rocky slopes. Finally the boy spoke, his voice innocent beneath the silence surrounding them. The fire and wood were there, but where was the lamb for the offering? Abraham's eyes filled with tears as he looked toward his son beneath the vast heavens above them. Then, with faith trembling yet unbroken, he answered softly that God himself would provide the lamb. The summit of the mountain stood silent beneath a sky veiled with drifting clouds while cold wind moved through the scattered stones and dry grass surrounding Abraham and Isaac. Together they built the altar carefully upon the lonely height, arranging the wood beneath the pale light of morning. Isaac still did not fully understand the sorrow hidden within his father's eyes, yet he trusted Abraham completely beneath the silence of the mountain. Every movement felt unbearably heavy to the old man whose hands trembled against the stones of the altar. The wind howled softly across the cliffs while distant birds circled beneath the gray heavens above them. Then Abraham turned toward his son with tears streaming silently down his weathered face. At last Isaac understood. Fear and confusion flickered across the boy's expression, yet no struggle came from him. Bound upon the altar beneath the open sky, Isaac looked toward his father whose heart, now shattered beneath obedience to God. Abraham lifted the knife with trembling hands while the heavens themselves seemed to fall silent around the mountain. Time stood still beneath the weight of that terrible moment. Then suddenly the voice of God thundered from heaven with commanding authority, stopping Abraham before the blade could fall. Relief crashed through the old man as the knife slipped from his hand onto the stones below. Isaac remained alive beneath the mercy of the Creator. Nearby, caught within the thorns of a bush upon the mountainside, a ram struggled against the branches. God had indeed provided the sacrifice. Abraham collapsed beside the altar while tears of gratitude and exhaustion fell upon the earth beneath him. The storm clouds above began to part as sunlight poured across the mountain in brilliant gold. Father and son embraced beneath the warmth of returning light, while wind swept through the heights carrying the scent of distant rain. And there upon the mountain of testing, Abraham learned that true faith required surrender beyond human understanding. Yet the mercy of God remained greater than fear, sorrow, or sacrifice itself. The years after Mount Moriah passed with quiet dignity beneath the changing skies of Canaan, while Abraham watched Isaac grow into manhood beside the tents and flocks of their wandering people. The old patriarch often sat beneath the ancient trees near his camp during the cool hours of evening, listening to the wind move across the hills while memories filled his aging heart. He remembered the long journey from Ur beneath unfamiliar stars, the promise spoken by God in the wilderness, the birth of Isaac, and the terrible mountain where faith had been tested beyond endurance. Around him, the generations continued multiplying beneath the covenant of the Creator. Servants worked among the herds while children played beside flowing wells reflecting the golden light of sunset. Yet age settled heavily upon Abraham. His steps slowed beneath the weight of passing years, and silver hair covered his head like frost upon the earth at dawn. One night beneath a sky crowded with stars, Sarah's life came quietly to its end. Abraham mourned beside her burial place with grief deeper than words could contain. She had journeyed beside him through every hardship and promise beneath the hand of God. Now her voice was gone from the tents forever. The old man wept beside the cave where she rested beneath the silent hills of Hebron, while cold winds swept through the valley outside. Still, life moved forward beneath heaven's command. Abraham sought a wife for Isaac, so the covenant line would continue through future generations. Rebekah came from distant lands beside the great rivers of the east, and Isaac loved her deeply beneath the blessing of God. Finally, after long years upon the earth, Abraham's own final season arrived. One evening, as the desert sky blazed crimson beyond the horizon, he rested quietly among his family, while distant shepherd fires flickered across the hills beneath the darkening heavens. Peace filled his spirit despite the sorrow and wandering of his long life. For Abraham knew the promises of God stretched far beyond his own years, reaching toward generations yet unborn beneath the eternal stars above creation. After Abraham was gathered to rest beside Sarah within the cave of Hebron, Isaac carried forward the covenant beneath the watchful eyes of heaven. The campfires of his father still burned across the hills of Canaan, while shepherds guided vast flocks through valleys brushed with morning mist and golden sunlight. Isaac walked often beneath the same stars Abraham once studied in silence, listening to the desert wind sweep through the wilderness, while the weight of legacy rested heavily upon him. Though quieter in spirit than his father, Isaac possessed deep reverence for the God who had preserved him upon the altar at Moriah. Beside him stood Rebekah, whose strength and devotion filled the tents with warmth during seasons of hardship and wandering. Yet sorrow soon entered their lives as the years passed without children. Rebekah's womb remained barren, while seasons rose and faded across the land. Isaac prayed fervently beneath lonely skies while cold night wind moved through the campfires around him. At last God answered his prayers, and Rebekah conceived twins whose struggle began even before birth. One evening beneath a sky glowing bronze with sunset, the Creator revealed that two nations rested within her womb, and that the older would one day serve the younger. The words lingered like mystery within the quiet tents of Isaac's household. When the time came, Esau emerged first, strong and wild like the untamed hills of the wilderness. Jacob followed, grasping his brother's heel as though destiny itself had already begun unfolding between them. The boys grew beneath open skies filled with circling hawks and drifting storm clouds. Esau became a hunter who roamed forests and rocky mountains carrying the scent of earth and sweat upon his skin. Jacob remained among the tents, thoughtful and observant beneath the calmer rhythms of camp life. Isaac favored Esau for his strength and skill, while Rebekah's heart leaned toward Jacob beneath the hidden knowledge of God's promise. And as the brothers walked separate paths beneath the endless heavens, tension quietly deepened within the family chosen to carry the covenant of generations forward through the unfolding story of mankind. The rivalry between Esau and Jacob grew stronger with every passing year beneath the rugged skies of Canaan. Esau wandered far through forests and mountains pursuing wild game beneath blazing suns and freezing dawns. His hands became rough with survival, while his spirit remained driven by impulse and hunger. Jacob moved differently through the world, He watched carefully, listened quietly, and carried within him a deep longing for the inheritance promised through Abraham and Isaac. One evening, as storm clouds gathered beyond the western hills and smoke curled upward from the cooking fires of the camp, Esau returned exhausted from the wilderness. Dust covered his skin while hunger burned fiercely within him after days spent hunting across barren valleys. Jacob stood beside a pot of steaming stew as cool winds swept through the tents around them. The rich scent of lentils and herbs filled the evening air, while thunder echoed faintly across the horizon. Desperate with hunger, Esau demanded food from his brother without patience or restraint. Jacob saw opportunity hidden within the moment. Calmly, he offered the meal in exchange for Esau's birthright, the sacred inheritance belonging to the firstborn son beneath the covenant of God. Esau laughed bitterly at the seriousness of the request. In his weariness and arrogance, he valued immediate hunger above future blessing. Swearing an oath without understanding the weight of what he surrendered, Esau traded his birthright for bread and stew beneath the dim firelight of the camp. Jacob watched silently as his brother ate with careless urgency while rain began falling softly upon the tents outside. Yet deeper conflict still waited ahead. Years later, when Isaac's eyes had grown dim with age and blindness covered his final days, Rebekah helped Jacob deceive his father in order to receive the blessing meant for Esau. Wrapped in animal skins and carrying the scent of the wilderness upon borrowed garments, Jacob entered Isaac's tent beneath flickering lamplight and spoke with trembling voice. And through deception born from fear and ambition, the blessing of Abraham passed into Jacob's hands beneath the sorrowful shadow of divided family and broken trust. When Esau discovered the blessing had been stolen from him, fury erupted within his heart like fire consuming dry wilderness grass beneath violent wind. His cry echoed through Isaac's tent with grief and rage powerful enough to shake the household beneath the darkening skies outside. Isaac trembled upon his bed while cold silence spread across the camp. Esau begged desperately for another blessing, but the sacred inheritance had already been spoken over Jacob and could not be undone. Bitterness hardened within the hunter's soul beneath the flickering firelight, while thoughts of vengeance quietly took root inside him. Rebekah, hearing of Esau's growing anger, feared for Jacob's life. One night beneath the cover of darkness, while wind swept dust through the sleeping camp and distant wolves howled across the hills, Jacob fled from his father's household toward the distant land of Haran. Alone beneath the endless heavens, he traveled across barren valleys and rocky wilderness where silence pressed heavily upon him with every step. Fear followed him through the cold nights. The guilt of deception lingered within his spirit, while uncertainty stretched before him like the empty desert beyond the horizon. Then one evening, exhausted from the journey, Jacob stopped beside a lonely place among scattered stones beneath the fading light of sunset. He lay upon the earth using a rock for his pillow while stars slowly emerged above the silent wilderness. Cold wind drifted across the hills as sleep finally overcame him beneath the night sky. Then the dream came. Jacob saw a stairway rising from the earth into the heavens themselves, shining with radiant light beyond mortal understanding. Angels moved upon it like living fire ascending and descending between heaven and earth. Above the stairway stood God, speaking with authority that filled the endless night. The Creator repeated the covenant first given to Abraham, promising land, descendants, and divine presence that would remain with Jacob wherever he journeyed. Jacob awoke trembling beneath the dawn light spreading across the wilderness. Awe filled his soul while morning wind moved softly across the stones around him. And in that lonely place far from home, the deceiver encountered the living God beneath the vastness of heaven itself. Jacob rose from the ground at sunrise while pale golden light spread across the wilderness surrounding the place where heaven had touched the earth within his dream. The air remained cold beneath the fading stars while wind swept gently through the barren hills around him. Trembling with awe, Jacob stood beside the stone upon which he had rested his head during the night. No longer did the wilderness seem empty or abandoned. The presence of God still lingered within the silence like unseen fire beneath the dawn. Carefully he lifted the stone upright as a sacred pillar and poured oil upon it, dedicating the lonely place to the Creator who had spoken to him there. He named the place Bethel, the house of God. Then, beneath the growing warmth of morning, Jacob continued his journey toward the eastern lands, carrying within his heart both fear and renewed purpose. Weeks passed across endless deserts and valleys until he finally arrived near the wells of Haran, where shepherds gathered their flocks beneath the blazing sun. Dust swirled through the air while sheep crowded around the stone-covered wells waiting for water. There Jacob first saw Rachel. She approached with her father's flock beneath the brilliant afternoon light, her dark hair moving softly in the desert wind while sunlight shimmered across the water beside her. The moment Jacob saw her, something awakened deeply within him. Strength surged through his weary body as he rolled away the heavy stone covering the well and watered her sheep before the astonished shepherds surrounding them. Rachel listened with wide eyes as Jacob revealed he was the son of Rebekah, her father's sister. Tears filled her eyes while joy spread through the household of Laban when Jacob arrived among his distant family. Yet the years ahead would not unfold easily. Jacob, who once deceived his own father, would now enter a household shaped by deception itself. Beneath the stars of Haran, amid weddings, labor, and rivalry, God would slowly transform the wandering fugitive into the man destined to become Israel, father of the nation through whom divine promise would continue across generations. Jacob remained in the household of Laban for many years beneath the harsh suns and cold nights of the eastern lands. He worked tirelessly among the flocks across valleys where wind carried dust through endless fields beneath open skies. From the beginning, Jacob's heart belonged to Rachel. Her presence brought warmth to the difficult years of labor while the desert stars shone above the camps each night. Laban agreed to give Rachel as Jacob's wife if he served 7 years tending the flocks. The years passed like days within Jacob's eyes because of his love for her. Morning after morning, he guided sheep across rocky hills, while evening fires flickered beneath the darkening heavens. Yet on the wedding night, beneath lantern light and heavy veils, Laban deceived Jacob just as Jacob had once deceived his own father. When dawn arrived and pale sunlight entered the tent, Jacob discovered Leah beside him rather than Rachel. Shock and anger surged through him while the camp slowly awakened beneath the rising sun. Laban defended his actions with calm manipulation, insisting the older daughter must marry first according to their custom. Jacob's own history of deception now returned upon him with painful irony beneath the watchful eyes of heaven. Still longing for Rachel, Jacob agreed to serve 7 more years for her hand in marriage. Time continued moving across the wilderness while rivalry quietly grew between Leah and Rachel within the household. Children were born beneath cries echoing through the tents during long desert nights, sons who would one day become the tribes of Israel itself. Jacob labored faithfully despite Laban's constant schemes and changing promises. Storms swept across the grazing lands while wolves stalked the flocks beneath moonlit skies. Yet Jacob endured every hardship with determination. Through the long years of labor, conflict, and family struggle, God continued blessing him abundantly. The once fearful fugitive from Canaan slowly became wealthy in livestock, servants, and strength. And beneath the endless heavens above Haran, the transformation of Jacob's life continued quietly through both suffering and blessing under the sovereign hand of God. After many years beneath the service of Laban, the voice of God came once more to Jacob during the silent hours before dawn, while cold wind moved across the grazing fields beneath fading stars. The Creator commanded him to return to the land of his fathers, the land promised long ago to Abraham and Isaac. Jacob stood among the sleeping flocks with unease stirring inside him. Though God had blessed him greatly with wives, children, servants, and countless animals, the thought of returning home filled him with fear. Esau still waited somewhere beyond the wilderness, and Jacob remembered clearly the hatred burning within his brother's eyes on the night he fled from Canaan years before. Quietly, Jacob gathered his family and possessions beneath the cover of darkness. Tents were dismantled while camels groaned beneath heavy loads as servants moved swiftly through the camp. Rachel held the younger children close while older sons guided sheep and cattle across the rugged terrain beneath gray morning skies. When Laban discovered Jacob had departed in secret, anger drove him into pursuit across the wilderness. Night settled heavily over the river Jabbok while cold mist drifted across the dark waters beneath a sky crowded with countless stars. Jacob remained alone upon the riverbank after sending his family and possessions ahead into the wilderness. The sound of flowing water echoed softly through the valley while wind moved through the trees surrounding the lonely place. Fear pressed upon Jacob with unbearable weight. Memories returned sharply beneath the darkness. The stolen blessing, Esau's fury, the years of exile and deception that had shaped his wandering life. Tomorrow he would stand before the brother he had betrayed long ago. Sleep refused to come. Jacob paced along the riverbank beneath the heavens, his breathing uneven while distant thunder murmured across the mountains. Then suddenly a figure emerged from the darkness and seized him. No words were spoken. The struggle began instantly beneath the cold night sky. Jacob wrestled fiercely against the mysterious stranger while dust and stones scattered across the ground beside the river. Hours passed beneath the endless heavens as neither overcame the other. Muscles burned with exhaustion while sweat covered Jacob's face despite the freezing wind surrounding them. Yet still he refused to release his grip. At last, near the breaking of dawn, the stranger touched Jacob's hip, and pain exploded through his body as the joint was wrenched from its place. Jacob collapsed, but still clung desperately to the figure before him. Then the stranger spoke with divine authority, commanding Jacob to let go before sunrise. But Jacob, wounded and trembling beneath the first pale light of dawn, refused to release him without receiving a blessing. Silence followed for a long moment while wine swept across the river valley. Then the stranger declared that Jacob would no longer bear the same name. He would now be called Israel, because he had struggled with God and with men and had prevailed. As sunrise spread gold across the horizon, Jacob realized he had encountered the divine presence itself. Limping from the encounter, yet transformed forever within his spirit, Israel crossed the river to face his future beneath the light of a new dawn. Morning sunlight spread across the wilderness beyond the river Jabbok, while Israel limped slowly toward the approaching company of his brother beneath the rising heat of day. Dust drifted through the valleys as Esau and 400 men advanced across the plains like a great tide moving beneath the open heavens. Fear still lingered within Israel despite the blessing received during the night. His children remained behind him beside Rachel, Leah, and the servants while the wind carried the distant sound of marching footsteps across the earth. Every memory of betrayal and hatred seemed to return beneath the glaring sunlight. Israel bowed low to the ground again and again as Esau drew near, preparing himself for rejection or death beneath the watchful eyes of his family. Yet what unfolded shattered every fear that had tormented him for years. Esau ran toward his brother with tears already filling his eyes. The fierce hunter of the wilderness embraced Israel tightly beneath the blazing sky, while both men wept openly upon the dusty ground. Years of bitterness melted away beneath the power of forgiveness. The wilderness around them seemed to fall silent except for the sound of wind sweeping softly across the hills. Israel looked into his brother's face with disbelief and gratitude overwhelming his spirit. The family gathered together beneath the warmth of reconciliation, while children stared in wonder at the brothers once divided by hatred, now standing united once more. Though the scars of the past could never fully disappear, peace had entered the broken relationship beneath heaven's mercy. Later, as evenings settled across the land and fires flickered among the tents beneath the stars, Israel sat quietly watching his children laugh beside Esau's camp. The limp from his encounter at Jabbok remained with him, a permanent reminder that the old Jacob had been changed forever through struggle, surrender, and divine grace. And as cool night wind moved across the wilderness beneath the endless heavens, the covenant carried through Abraham continued unfolding through the growing family of Israel, whose descendants would one day become a mighty nation beneath the hand of God. The household of Israel multiplied greatly across the land of Canaan beneath seasons of abundance and hardship woven together beneath the changing skies. Sons grew into strong young men among the tents and flocks, while daughters carried water from wells reflecting the light of dawn across the valleys. Yet among all his children, Israel loved Joseph more deeply than the others. Joseph had been born to Rachel, the beloved wife whose beauty and gentleness remained forever treasured within Israel's heart even after her death upon the road to Bethlehem. The boy carried a quiet wisdom within him unlike his brothers. His eyes seemed filled with dreams reaching beyond the ordinary rhythms of shepherd life beneath the wilderness skies. Israel fashioned a richly colored robe for Joseph, a visible sign of favor that stirred jealousy among his older brothers like slow-burning fire hidden beneath dry earth. Tension spread through the camp with every passing season. Joseph spoke openly about dreams that troubled his brothers even further. Visions where sheaves of grain bowed before him in the fields, and stars themselves bent low in reverence beneath the heavens. To the older brothers, these dreams sounded like arrogance and insult. Their resentment deepened beneath the hot sun of Canaan, while Joseph continued walking innocently among them, wearing the robe of his father's affection. One afternoon, Israel sent Joseph across the wilderness to check on his brothers, tending flocks near Dothan. The boy journeyed alone beneath blazing skies while wind carried dust across the rocky paths before him. In the distance, his brothers saw the colorful robe approaching through the heat rising from the earth. Anger hardened within them as they whispered together beneath the shadow of betrayal. Some spoke openly of murder, their hearts poisoned by envy and hatred. Reuben urged restraint while the others waited silently for Joseph to arrive among them. The wilderness stood vast and empty beneath the glaring heavens while birds circled high above the lonely fields. And there, far from their father's sight, the sons of Israel prepared to commit a deed that would alter the destiny of generations beneath the unfolding hand of God. Joseph approached his brothers with innocence still resting upon his face, while the desert wind moved softly through the valleys surrounding the grazing fields near Dothan. The sunlight reflected brightly against the richly colored robe his father had given him, a garment that had become a symbol of division within the family of Israel. Before Joseph could fully greet them, rough hands seized him violently beneath the burning sky. Shock filled his eyes as his brothers surrounded him with hatred no longer hidden behind silence. The wilderness echoed with angry voices while dust rose around their feet upon the dry earth. They tore the robe from Joseph's body and cast him into a deep, empty pit carved into the rocky ground. Darkness swallowed him while his cries rose upward from beneath the earth, begging for mercy from the very brothers who should have protected him. Above the pit, the brothers sat together beneath the blazing sun and ate their meal as though nothing sacred had been broken between them. Then a caravan appeared in the distance, moving slowly across the wilderness toward Egypt. Camels carried spices and goods through clouds of drifting dust, while merchants shouted to one another beneath the heat of afternoon. Judah saw opportunity within the passing caravan and persuaded the others not to kill Joseph outright. Instead, they pulled their younger brother from the pit and sold him for silver beneath the cold gaze of strangers. Joseph struggled helplessly while the traders bound him and forced him toward the caravan, disappearing into the horizon. His brothers stood silently watching as the figure of Joseph vanished into the desert beyond them. To conceal their betrayal, they dipped the colored robe into the blood of a slain goat before carrying it back to their father. That evening, Israel held the torn garment beneath flickering firelight, while grief consumed him like a storm tearing through the soul. He believed his beloved son had been devoured by wild beasts somewhere in the wilderness. The cries of mourning echoed through the camp beneath the darkened heavens, while far away Joseph journeyed toward Egypt in chains, unaware that beyond suffering and betrayal, God was already guiding his path toward a destiny far greater than any dream he had ever spoken beneath the stars of Canaan. The caravan carrying Joseph crossed endless deserts beneath skies burned white by the relentless Egyptian sun. Days blurred together through clouds of dust and exhaustion, while chains rubbed painfully against Joseph's wrists as the merchants traveled southward toward the mighty kingdom beside the Nile. At night, he lay awake beneath unfamiliar stars, listening to camels groan and traders whisper beside flickering fires. Grief weighed heavily upon him. His father believed him dead. His brothers had abandoned him without mercy. The dreams once alive within his spirit now seemed buried beneath betrayal and slavery. Yet even amid despair, the presence of God remained quietly near. Weeks later, the towering city of Egypt rose before the caravan like a vision carved from stone and gold. Massive temples pierced the skyline, while the Nile shimmered beneath the blazing sun like a river of molten light flowing through the heart of the empire. Crowds filled the streets beneath clouds of incense and smoke, while soldiers marched beside chariots rattling over ancient stone roads. Joseph was sold within the bustling slave markets where voices shouted in foreign tongues beneath the heat of day. An Egyptian official named Potiphar purchased him for service within his household. Though carried into a strange land far from home, Joseph worked faithfully beneath every burden placed upon him. Seasons passed within Potiphar's estate, where gardens bloomed beside flowing water channels, and servants moved through halls adorned with painted walls and burning torches. Joseph's diligence and wisdom soon became evident to all who observed him. Potiphar entrusted more and more authority into his hands until the young Hebrew managed nearly every part of the household. Yet temptation and danger still waited within the shadows of Egypt. Potiphar's wife became consumed with desire for Joseph and repeatedly sought to seduce him beneath the hidden corridors of the estate. Joseph resisted her advances with unwavering integrity, refusing to betray both his master and the God who watched over him. Humiliated by rejection, she turned her lust into accusation. One afternoon, her false cries echoed through the household, while servants rushed toward the chamber in confusion. By evening, Joseph stood condemned beneath lies he could not defend, and the gates of the prison closed behind him beneath the fading light of Egypt's setting sun. The prison of Egypt lay buried beneath cold stone walls where darkness lingered even beneath the brilliance of the desert sun above. Damp air filled the narrow chambers while chains clattered endlessly through corridors lit only by flickering torchlight. Joseph sat alone within the shadows after the heavy gates closed behind him, his spirit crushed beneath another betrayal he could neither understand nor escape. The dreams of his youth seemed impossibly distant now. He had journeyed from favored son to slave, and from slave to prisoner beneath a foreign king whose language and customs still surrounded him like an endless maze. At night, he listened to distant cries echo through the prison halls while cold wind drifted faintly through iron-barred openings high above the stone walls. Yet even there, forgotten by men, Joseph was not abandoned by God. Over time, the prison keeper noticed something different within the Hebrew prisoner. Joseph carried himself with quiet strength rather than bitterness. He treated fellow prisoners with compassion while faithfully completing every task placed before him. Gradually, responsibility was entrusted into his hands, just as it had once been within Potiphar's household. Though still confined behind stone and iron, Joseph gained favor even within the depths of suffering. Then one night, two prisoners were thrown into the cells near Joseph, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker, both imprisoned after offending the ruler of Egypt. Days later, they awoke troubled by mysterious dreams that filled them with dread beneath the dim torchlight of morning. Joseph listened carefully while chains rattled softly through the corridors around them. Through the wisdom given by God, he interpreted their dreams with unsettling precision. The cupbearer would soon be restored to Pharaoh's service, while the baker faced death beneath royal judgment. Exactly as Joseph foretold, the dreams came to pass. Before the cupbearer departed the prison, Joseph pleaded for one simple act of mercy. "Remember me when you stand again before Pharaoh," he asked beneath the flickering torchlight. Yet once restored to power and comfort within Egypt's royal courts, the cupbearer forgot the Hebrew prisoner entirely. And as years slipped by beneath the endless desert skies, Joseph remained confined within darkness, waiting silently for the moment God's greater purpose would finally unfold. 2 full years passed beneath the shadowed walls of Egypt's prison while Joseph remained forgotten among the condemned. Beyond the stone corridors, the kingdom flourished beneath Pharaoh's power as the Nile overflowed through fertile fields glowing green beneath the relentless sun. Merchants crowded the streets of great cities while priests offered incense before towering idols beneath skies burning with desert heat. Yet within the royal palace, unrest quietly stirred beneath the surface of prosperity. One night, Pharaoh awoke, trembling from dreams so vivid and terrifying they shattered the silence of the royal chambers before dawn. He had seen 7 healthy cattle feeding peacefully beside the Nile, until 7 gaunt and diseased cattle emerged from the river and devoured them completely. Again he dreamed of 7 full heads of grain swallowed by 7 thin and withered stalks scorched by the desert wind. Morning arrived with dread hanging over the palace like storm clouds gathering before judgment. Pharaoh summoned every wise man, priest, and magician within Egypt, yet none could explain the meaning hidden inside the visions. Then suddenly the chief cupbearer remembered the Hebrew prisoner forgotten within the depths of the dungeon. Joseph was rushed from the prison chambers beneath the urgent command of Pharaoh. Servants shaved and clothed him, while torchlight flickered against polished stone halls leading toward the throne room. The scent of incense filled the air as Joseph entered the vast chamber, where Pharaoh sat beneath towering pillars adorned with gold and carved gods staring from every wall. Silence settled across the court, while sunlight streamed through high openings above the throne. Pharaoh recounted the troubling dreams, while Joseph listened calmly beneath the gaze of Egypt's ruler. Then, with humility untouched by pride, Joseph declared that interpretation belonged not to men but to God alone. The dreams revealed 7 years of extraordinary abundance soon coming upon Egypt, followed by 7 years of devastating famine that would consume the land. Joseph advised Pharaoh to prepare wisely during the years of plenty. The royal court stood stunned beneath the weight of the revelation. And there, in the halls of Egypt's greatest kingdom, the forgotten prisoner began rising toward the destiny God had prepared through every season of suffering and silence. Pharaoh looked upon Joseph with astonishment beneath the blazing sunlight pouring through the towering halls of the royal palace. None among Egypt's wisest counselors possessed wisdom like the Hebrew who stood before him with calm authority untouched by fear. The silence within the throne room deepened while incense smoke curled upward between pillars carved with images of ancient gods. Then Pharaoh rose from his throne and declared that no man in all Egypt would be greater than Joseph except Pharaoh himself. Gasps spread through the court as servants hurried forward, carrying fine garments woven from linen brighter than desert light. The chains of prison were removed forever from Joseph's wrists, while a golden signet ring from Pharaoh's own hand was placed upon him as a symbol of authority. The former prisoner was clothed in royal garments and adorned with a chain of gold across his neck beneath the stunned eyes of nobles and priests. Chariots carried Joseph through the streets of Egypt, while crowds bowed before him beneath the scorching sun. Trumpets echoed between towering stone buildings as heralds proclaimed his new authority over the kingdom. Yet Joseph never forgot the suffering that had brought him to this moment. The memories of betrayal, slavery, and prison still lingered within his spirit like scars hidden beneath royal robes. Guided by wisdom from God, Joseph traveled throughout Egypt, organizing vast storehouses during the 7 years of abundance. Fields produced grain beyond measure, while the Nile overflowed with life beneath clear blue skies. Workers gathered harvests endlessly beneath the heat of summer, while Joseph oversaw every city and province with tireless discipline. Mountains of grain rose within the storehouses like golden hills beneath torchlight and dust-filled air. Then, exactly as the dreams had warned, the years of famine arrived. Rain vanished from the skies while rivers shrank beneath the burning sun. Crops withered across the earth, and hunger spread through nations like a shadow swallowing the world. Yet Egypt remained prepared. Under Joseph's leadership, the storehouses opened while desperate crowds traveled from distant lands seeking food and survival. And far beyond the deserts separating kingdoms, famine also reached the land of Canaan, where Jacob and his sons now faced hunger beneath darkening skies, unaware that the brother they once sold into slavery had become the key to their salvation. The famine tightened its grip across the lands of Canaan like a merciless drought sent upon the earth beneath scorching skies devoid of rain. Fields once alive with grain now cracked beneath the relentless heat, while rivers shrank into shallow streams winding through dust-covered valleys. Hunger spread through villages and camps as families searched desperately for food beneath the burning sun. In the tents of Jacob, fear and uncertainty settled heavily upon the household. The aging patriarch listened silently while his sons spoke of Egypt, where grain still remained under the authority of a powerful ruler whose wisdom had preserved the kingdom through the famine. Though weakened by years and sorrow, Jacob commanded his sons to journey southward and purchase food before starvation consumed them all. Only Benjamin, Rachel's youngest son and now the beloved of his father, remained behind beneath Jacob's fearful protection. The brothers traveled across the wilderness beneath harsh desert winds, carrying silver and empty sacks toward the mighty land beside the Nile. Days later, they entered Egypt's crowded cities where starving travelers from many nations gathered beneath towering stone temples and blazing sunlight reflected from the river waters. At last, they stood before Joseph, though none recognized the brother they had betrayed years before. He now appeared clothed in Egyptian authority, his face hardened by time and power beneath the royal headdress of Pharaoh's court. Yet the moment Joseph saw them bowing before him, memories surged through his spirit like a flood breaking against stone. The dreams of his youth stood fulfilled before his eyes. His brothers, the very men who had cast him into the pit and sold him into slavery, now knelt seeking mercy from his hand. Emotion threatened to overwhelm him, but Joseph concealed his identity beneath stern authority. He questioned them sharply through interpreters while the brothers trembled beneath confusion and fear. None understood that the ruler before them was the young dreamer they once abandoned to the desert caravan beneath the skies of Dothan. And within the vast halls of Egypt, beneath flickering torchlight and the scent of grain filling the air, God's hidden plan continued unfolding through reconciliation, testing, and redemption far greater than any man could yet comprehend. Joseph studied the faces of his brothers beneath the torchlit halls of Egypt, while memories long buried rose painfully within him. He recognized each voice, each expression shaped by the years since they had stood above the pit in Dothan beneath the burning sun. Yet they saw only an Egyptian ruler seated in power before them, not the brother they believed lost forever. Joseph spoke harshly through interpreters, accusing them of being spies sent to uncover the weakness of Egypt during the famine. Fear spread across the brothers as they fell trembling before him beneath the cold stone pillars of the royal chamber. They defended themselves desperately, explaining they were sons of one man living in Canaan, and that one brother remained with their father while another was gone. The words pierced Joseph like a blade beneath the calm mask he struggled to maintain. Gone. To them, he was still only a memory swallowed by tragedy years before. Joseph turned away briefly as emotion threatened to break through his composure. Outside the palace windows, sunlight blazed across Egypt's crowded streets while dry wind carried dust through the city beneath cloudless skies. Yet within Joseph's heart, old wounds battled against longing for reconciliation. He decided to test his brothers, to see whether time and suffering had changed the men who once sold him without mercy. Simeon was bound before their eyes while the others received grain and were commanded to return with Benjamin, the youngest brother, as proof of their honesty. Shock and fear consumed the brothers as soldiers led Simeon away beneath the echo of rattling chains. They whispered among themselves with growing guilt, believing their present suffering was punishment for the evil committed against Joseph long ago. Hidden from their sight, Joseph listened to their words and wept quietly beneath the shadow of his authority. When the brothers departed Egypt carrying grain across the wilderness toward Canaan, confusion and dread traveled beside them. And back within the royal chambers of Egypt, Joseph stood alone beneath flickering torchlight, wrestling between justice and mercy, while destiny moved steadily toward the moment when truth would finally stand revealed beneath heaven itself. The journey back to Canaan unfolded beneath endless skies streaked with dust and fading sunlight, while Joseph's brothers carried both grain and fear within their hearts. The wilderness wind swept across the caravan as camels groaned beneath heavy sacks tied carefully for the long road home. Yet unease followed them with every mile. Simeon remained imprisoned in Egypt, and the powerful ruler's demand for Benjamin cast a shadow darker than the famine itself over the sons of Jacob. One evening, while campfires flickered beneath cold stars and the scent of dry earth filled the night air, one brother opened his grain sack only to discover his silver returned inside. Terror spread instantly among them. Soon the others found their silver as well. They stared at one another in stunned silence while wind moved softly through the desert camp around them. To the brothers this seemed not mercy but judgment, as though heaven itself was exposing hidden sins long buried beneath the passing years. When they finally reached their father's tents in Canaan, grief overwhelmed the household once more. Jacob listened in horror as his sons recounted the events in Egypt, the accusations, Simeon's imprisonment, and the demand that Benjamin must return with them if they wished to buy food again. The old patriarch's face hardened beneath sorrow and fear. Rachel was gone. Joseph was believed dead. Now Simeon remained captive, and they sought to take Benjamin as well, the last son of Rachel whom Jacob loved with fierce devotion. He refused completely beneath the dim light of evening fires while cold winds swept across the camp. Yet the famine worsened with relentless cruelty. Weeks passed as food dwindled and hunger tightened around the household like an invisible chain. Children cried through the night, while livestock weakened beneath barren fields and dry skies. At last Judah stepped forward before his father with solemn resolve. He pledged his own life as guarantee for Benjamin's safety and begged Jacob to let them return before the family perished entirely. Tears filled the old man's weary eyes as dawn light slowly spread across the wilderness. Then, with trembling sorrow, Jacob released Benjamin into their care beneath the uncertain path of destiny unfolding beyond the desert horizon.